It begins a small amount in our lives, a little speck maybe, but before you know it, if you don't root that out, it's becoming more and more to the point that if you can, you'll seek that sin out in a greater measure, in something that's greater, and something that's more, and something that'll give you a greater high or a greater thrill, and then you want more and more and more of that until you get to a situation that is horrible. And so that's kind of the way the world is right now. Nobody is satisfied with what they've got. Truth, is that truth? People that are in high paying positions, most of the time they're not satisfied with what they got. They want another promotion, they want another raise, they want another this, another that. People that are getting these bonuses, $1 million a year bonuses, are not satisfied with that. They want $10 million bonuses a year. They don't, or the people are just have a personality and an addiction type spirit that's not enough. We always are wanting more, and that's true. For us, it may be little things that we want more. Something that's good, we may want something more. But God has sent us here to do a work for Him that is so important in this day and time, because if you can witness to somebody, Sister Amy, in this day and hour, and they accept that call of Jesus in their life, they give their heart to Jesus, it's like you're pulling them out of the flames of hell. It's that close. It's that close. And if it's not that close to God's coming, and I believe it is, it's that close maybe to their death or to the Lord coming for them. And so it's important that we obey what God's telling us to do. We've got to be obedient children. The Bible teaches me to obey is better than sacrifice. You can fast and you can pray and you can give to the poor and you can give to the church and you can do all the things that you need to do. Do things for your brother, sacrifice your time, do things for your brother. But if you're not being obedient to God, you're doing that and it's good and they benefit something from it, but God says be obedient. It's better than being sacrificial. It's better than giving your body to be burned if you're obedient unto God. So we have to learn how to obey. And it's just like a child. We teach our children how to obey. And we usually start out telling them to, do this or do that or whatever it is you're wanting them to do. Make their bed or clean take their plates and put them in the dishwasher. Whatever it is that you're trying to teach them to do to clean up after themselves. Why, you start out with something small and it gets a little more and it gets a little more. And sometimes if they get stubborn, it takes a smack. It takes a smack on the leg. It takes a smack to, you got to do this. And then when they get real rebellious, sometimes it takes a whipping. What we call whipping. I'm not talking about a beating, but I still believe in whipping your child. I do. It's the word. And I believe sometimes it calls for that. I don't like it. I don't like it. Now, when Duffy was little, I didn't like whipping him, but I hate it when he whips the girls in your eye. I mean, I just hate it. But I know that it's necessary at times. Sometimes it's not. But most of the time it is. But anyway, God is that way with us. Sometimes if we get stubborn on Him and we don't want to obey Him, He'll smack our legs a little bit. Say, come on, you got to do this. And it's always for our own good, to help us to mature and help us to grow and help us to be more than what we are right now. All right? So we, as children of God, have got to be obedient. And when we are obedient, we become change makers. And when I read that title, I actually read this title. I didn't come up with it all by myself. And I read this title. It grabbed a hold of my heart, and I thought, God, we do need to make changes in our world. We need to be someone that can make changes in the life of those people that are around us, whether it's our families, whether it's our neighbors, whether it's somebody that, we've known for years and years, a coworker. But we need to be able to make a change in someone's life. And the way that we make changes in somebody's life is by being that witness to them, not just in word, but in deed. Do y'all agree with me? There's a lot of people out there behind the pulpit and sitting in the seats. There's a lot of people out there, Sister Teresa, that will tell about God, but they don't live about God. And they don't live what they say. And so we've got to live what we say. We've got to be able to have kindness and goodness and gentleness and meekness and all the fruits of the Spirit. And we've got to be able to reach out with that love, Sister Becky, and show them the love of God and not just tell them about the love of God. And the Scripture's plain on that when He talks about when you find your brother that's hungry, feed him. You find somebody that's cold, give him a coat to wear. If you find somebody that's in trouble, go a second mile with them. You know, I've preached that before, and you all know that we have to be able to do that to show the love of God. So in showing the love of God, we become change makers. But you got to show the love of God. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, Will, how that in today's time, God doesn't have to step down out of heaven to make a change in this world. He's already done that. Jesus Christ came to the earth as a babe, and he died on a cross to save us from our sins and to change the world. He's already done that. But he left us a commission that we are to be change makers, and he told us that we are to be available to him. That's all it takes, is to be available. You don't have to be real talented. You don't have to sing like a bird. You don't have to play music and have a talent to do that. You don't even have to have a talent to witness or to speak. All you have to be is available, because he will fill your mouth when it is needed. He'll give you that to say and that to do when that time is needed. But we've got to learn to be available to him. You know, most of the time, God's people don't allow themselves to be used of God. And it's because most of the time, Sister Claudette, they feel inferior. They feel too little, too small, not enough. They have those feelings there, and I'm sure everybody in here, that sounds familiar to you. I'm sure, and I absolutely loved those many years ago, several years ago, when Brother Russell decided to take the Sunday school. He does not know what that done for me. Not just because we needed a Sunday school superintendent and we needed somebody to step into that position, but because I knew that was not his comfort zone. I knew it was not his comfort zone to get up here in front of people and begin to talk. I knew that it wasn't his comfort zone to be able to make decisions for the church and for the Sunday school, that he would just rather not do that, and he would have been fine just coming to Sunday school and giving and doing, but not to be out front. And when he said he would do that, he does not know how that blessed my heart. Even today, when I think about it, it blesses my heart. I thank God he was willing to step out. And I've watched him, become a board member. I've watched him do other things. And I thought, Lord, he has grown in you because he simply took a step of obedience out. And it's thrilled me. And I don't know if I've ever told you that, Russell, but you have thrilled my soul that time and many times since then when I thought about it. It has just thrilled me. But I thought, probably when the Lord was dealing with him, maybe you need to take the Sunday school. That's something that they need, and maybe you can do that. I am sure that he felt himself pulling back and Satan telling him, you're inferior, you don't speak well. Probably talked to him like Moses. The devil talked to Moses. You don't speak well. You can't do this. You get up in front of everybody. This is not what God's called you to do. Somebody else that's better able to do that, has a better way of speaking or a better way of doing this, should be able to do that. And you just sit right here and you support them, but don't be, moving out. Brother Parks felt that way. He told me that when the Lord called him to preach, his brother preached, Brother Claude Ely, his cousin, preached, and different ones. And he said, he told the Lord, he said, now God, he was working a job. And he said, I'll give. I'll support them. I'll pay my tithes, and I'll give more than my tithes. And I'll support them brothers that are out there preaching. I'll go with them and sing with them because, he sung. He said, I'll go with them, and I'll stand behind them, and I'll sing with them. But, God, I don't want to preach. And he wasn't willing to the point that God had to get his attention. And that's when he had that terrible car accident that just about took his life. And he said, I knew what God was telling me. He was telling me, you're either going to live or die. You're going to do what I told you to do. And he said, I became very willing to preach the gospel. And it became something that he loved to do. He loved to witness for the Lord. But the devil has been using that trick ever since the beginning of time. You're not enough. You're inferior. You're not, you don't know God's will. Who are you to know who God speaks to? Who are you to know when God's talking to you? How do you know that's the voice of God? And I know that because he's used those very same things on me. But over time, and I thought about, you all might not think about stuff like this. I'm just a little different, I guess. But I have thought so many times about Adam and Eve. And even though I've got real aggravated at Eve at times, especially when hot flashes come, I usually say, Eve, you're an idiot, something like that. Because I don't believe we would have had to went through that, ladies, if it hadn't been for the sin in the garden. I believe we would have just chilled out the whole time. But I feel sorry for them, because can you imagine, Amanda, living in the Garden of Eden and have everything that you need at your fingertips? And you get to walk with God every evening. He comes down to speak to you, and you get to take a walk with God. How many if God told you this evening at 7 o'clock, I'm going to take a walk with you? Would you not be ready? Wouldn't you have your running shoes on, your walking shoes on, and be ready to take a walk with God? I would. I'd be waiting on the front porch. Here I am. So can you imagine having that? And all the animals are all agreeable. Nobody's fussing and fighting. Ain't no one tiger fighting a lion, and there's nobody killing anybody. And everything is sweet. And I believe the fruit and the vegetables in the garden were the best in the world. I believe they had the best tasting corn. I don't believe we've ever tasted corn as good as what they had in the garden. I don't believe the grapes were ever as good now as they were in the garden. I believe they had the best of everything. And then to commit the sin that they committed and to separate themselves from God, because that's what it was all about. They separated themselves from God. And being kicked out of the garden, and I don't know how far they went, but I don't know. I think sometimes they must have looked back that way. Maybe they seen the flaming swords that was keeping them away, because I'm sure they tried to get back in. I would have. Would you? I'd been sneaking around trying to get back in. Sure I would have. And you would have too. But can you imagine them looking and thinking, if I just hadn't done that? Man, why did I do that? I can only imagine the sorrow that gripped their hearts, and them thinking, this is a time that I walked with Jesus. This is a time that God came down and spoke to me. And he's away from me now. There's a separation between us. And oh, I'd love to have some of those grapes. Do you remember, Eve, how good those grapes were? We don't have any grapes out here. Do you remember those apples? And do you remember those bananas? And oh, my Lord, that corn was so good. I wish we had not done what we done. Have you ever done anything and you think later, I wish I had not done that? Man, I wish I hadn't said that. Man, I wish I hadn't went there. Man, I wish I just thought better. We've all done that. And so sometimes, Sister Amy, I feel so sorry for them, because they had to live the rest of their lives away from God and away from that garden that they found so much joy in. I don't know how long they were in the garden. Some people say they were in there for years, hundreds of years before this happened. I don't know how long it was. But I do know that when they had to leave that garden, the sorrow that must have gripped their heart and the grief that they must have felt for the rest of their lives, that they had done something so horrible they could never go back and live in that again. But I thought about how that change makers come to be. And some of them I thought about in the Bible. And like I said, this is going to be a two-parter. I'm not going to preach real long on this, but I am going to finish it up one Sunday. Go a little different in it, because this is what I feel. But I thought how that we feel like we're not enough, but if we will let us do what God says and we'll follow in his path, we'll become a change maker. Brother Russell is a change maker. He not only has changed our Sunday school, that it's better, but he's also changed himself, that he's able to do other things and do more things and take a part. And he's changed our young people, that we've got young people. We've got Reed, we've got Uriah, we've got Isaac, we've got Isabella, we've got others in the church that will come up here and stand behind the pulpit, and that will take up, the Sunday after Sunday school, and they'll take up the do the little prizes and ask what they did in Sunday school. And what they're doing, that may seem small and may seem little, but it's giving them confidence and courage that they can get up in front of people and begin to speak. So he's a change maker, because a lot of those kids will never do that. But Russell, you are a change maker. You're getting them up here and they're speaking and they're talking in front of people. And someday, some of those very young kids may be preachers. Isabella may be a preacher someday. If time lasts, would it be something if you've seen Isabella behind this pulpit bringing forth the gospel? And, she's used to that because she's been up talking before people. Man, I'm telling you, to be a change maker is important. But Brother Russell, you are a change maker. And I thought about how that when we feel like we're too little, it's because we feel like we're not perfect. But I'm going to tell you that when I look through the Bible, Junebug, I have not found one perfect person except Jesus Christ, who knew no sin, and no sin was found in him. Every single person that he called, Will, had faults. They had failings, and some of them were pretty big in our eyes. I mean, in God's eyes, sin's sin. But in our eyes, let's be honest, some sins are worse than others. We feel that way. But I thought about Brother Moses. And when I was thinking about Brother Moses, I thought what a great man of God he was. When you read in the Word of God, Moses is so prevalent in the Old Testament. And I thought about how that he led God's people out of bondage, out of Egypt, and he led them, which Egypt stands for sin, and he led them out of that bondage, and he led them to the promised land. And I thought, Lord, what a great man of God he was. Do you know that Moses is attributed to writing several books of the Bible? I think it's the first 5 books of the Bible that he is attributed to writing Genesis. What do you think God was telling him when he's up there on that mountain for 40 days and 40 nights? What do you think he was doing? They just sitting up there chit-chatting? I think God was telling him the things that happened that nobody knew about yet. And I think Moses was writing that stuff down. And I think God provided whatever it was. If it was, sheepskin or whatever it was, parchment paper, whatever it was he was trying to write on, I believe God provided that for him. But anyway, Moses wrote the first 5 books. It's attributed to him that he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And do you know that God called him friend? God called him friend. Do you know he was so close to God? They were like best buds, Junebug. They were so close that when he asked to see God, God said, I can't let you see me because your body can't stand it. You'll fall over dead. But he said, I love you so much, and you're such a good friend of mine. He said, I'm going to walk past you, and I'm going to put my hand over you. And he said, when I do that, I'm going to move my hand where you can't see my face, and you can see me walk past. You can watch the backward part of me. So Moses got to see the back of God. You talk about a good man. I mean, he's God's best bud. I mean, you just got to think of it that way. He was wonderful. But do you know that Moses was a murderer? He murdered a man. Do you know that Moses tried his best to get out of leading the children of Israel, and he claimed that he was slow of speech, that he had a stammer, a stutter? And obviously he did because God gave him Aaron. I love it when God comes back with every excuse that we have not to do. He comes back with an answer for it. So when Moses was saying, God, I can't do this, I'm slow of speech. It's kind of like, some people are real quick-witted. You can say, well, they can come up with a joke in a minute. They can just do real quick-witted. Some of them are like me, and I go home and think, man, I wish I'd have said that. That would have been funny, or that would have been good, or whatever. I'm not quick-witted like that. But Moses said, I'm slow of speech. I believe he had a stammer. And so God looks at him and goes, I'm going to send Aaron, your brother, with you. He's not slow of speech, and he's going to help you do this. So God takes away those excuses. But do you know that Moses also had a temper? He did have a temper. You think Moses was perfect? He wasn't perfect. He's a murderer. He tried to wiggle out of what God wanted him to do. And he had a temper. You go to Arlene, tell me how Moses had a temper. Well, first of all, Moses, when he was up there on the mountain, and he was getting the 10 Commandments, and he heard the wildness of the people down in the valley. He went down to see what was going on. He watched them sacrificing and dancing before an idol, and he got so mad he took the very rocks that God's finger wrote upon and threw them down and broke them. That's kind of a temper, to take the commandments that God wrote with his own finger. Because later when he went back up to get them again, guess what? He had to write them. He had to chisel them out himself. God wrote them the first time. God said, boy, you shouldn't have destroyed my commandments. You're going to write them this time. But God still loved him. He still used him. When Moses was leading the children of Israel, and honest to goodness, I feel like Brother Moses, even though he had a temper, I feel like a lot of times he was justified in it. Because when they were up there and they were complaining and they were murmuring again, would to God we'd stayed in Egypt. That was getting on his last nerve. He's probably thinking, they's killing you children. They was beating you to death. I had to run from Pharaoh because I killed a man that was, abusing one of the Jews. And so they were being so abusive towards you all. And all y'all talk about is going back, going back, going back. Every time something's hard, you want to go back. So he grabbed his rod and he smote against a rock without giving God the glory or the honor first. Water came out because he was a man of God. But because of that, he didn't get to see the promised land himself. But he still was a friend of God. See, we, with our failings, we want to think that we fail so much that God can't use us. But church, that's not true. He takes things that are broken, things that are not perfect, and he begins to shine them up. And he begins to use them for his work. If he wanted perfect people, he would have made perfect people. If he wanted perfect people, Adam and Eve would have never had a choice of whether to eat of that tree or not. But see, he gives people choices. So when he called Brother Moses, if Brother Moses said no and he absolutely wouldn't do it, he would have called somebody else. It may have been a Brother Peter. It may have been a Brother Paul. It would have been somebody else that he would have called because he was getting his people out of Egypt. But Moses, in all of his imperfections, did what God told him to do. God gave him the strength and God gave him the courage. And so he, even with all of his temper problems and even with the fact that he was a murderer, even in the fact that he was a little afraid in the beginning to stand before Pharaoh because he knew him, God used him mightily. Stretched out his rod and the Red Sea began to blow back and part. You ever know anybody can do that? You can't go over to the Molus River and stretch a stick out and let it roll back. Won't happen. The Red Sea began to roll back because God was using him. A murderer. Somebody had a temper. Somebody had anger issues. And God was using him. There was a time they were winning a battle. And Moses had his hands up. Woo, we got the victory. We got the victory. And his arms got tired. And he let them down. And when he let them down, we started losing. And he put them back up. He got tired, put them down. We started losing. As long as he had his arms up in victory, which is a whole nother message, God was blessing the army, and we were winning the battle, and the enemy was being destroyed. So they got two men. Aaron and Hur came along, and they held his arms up because they was just so heavy he couldn't hold them up. Whole nother message, guys, about how much your pastor needs you. But we won't preach that tonight. But he had his arms up. God used him. Used his arms to bring victory. Amen? And he led God's people right to the edge of the promised land. He probably could look and maybe see the edge of it. Couldn't go into it, but he could see the edge of it. So the friend of God, his best bud, somebody that God loved so much, Junebug, was not a perfect man. We're not perfect, but still God calls us to works. I'm not perfect. If you don't know that by now, I'm telling you flat out up front, I'm not perfect. Got plenty of faults. But God's seen, and he knows our hearts. Amen? I thought about Father Abraham. Oh, Brother Abraham. My Lord. Not just the Jewish religion, not just the, oops, that's mine. Not just, the Jewish Bible, but the Quran. Everybody's got Abraham in it, right? It's not a dispute that Abraham was real. And so Abraham, God seen him, and he was an idol worshiper. At that time, he was an idol worshiper. He wasn't sitting there not worshiping idols. He was part of that culture, part of that society. So he was an idol worshiper, and God came down and spoke to him and told him, leave your family, which he took his nephew and his father, but leave the rest of your family and go off to a journey that I'm going to give you. And he obeyed God, and he became the father to the Jewish nation. And I would think when he got up and obeyed God, Sister Kim, that he was perfect. I mean, my Lord. He done a whole lot. But did you know that Abraham was a liar? Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I had a hard time writing that down. I had a hard time saying it. Don't like thinking those things. But not only was he a liar, but he had fear, just like we do. And you think, Darlene, okay, tell me about this liar and this fearful person that became the father of the Jews. Well, he had a wife named Sarai, and Sarai was extremely beautiful. They had beautiful women during that time, but she was extremely beautiful. She was a hot mama. No, she wasn't a mama yet, but she was something. And when he began to go into his journeys, he were going in crossing other people's land. And so the king seen Sarah. He thought, man, she's a good-looking woman. I think I'd like to get to know her better. And you all know what I'm talking about. And so he takes her. And so Abraham, being fearful, tells Sarah, said, you tell him you're my sister. Now, she was his sister. She was his half-sister. So it wasn't that he was a total liar, but she was his wife. And he did not want her to say, she's my wife. So he was lying. And so twice, not just the first time, and God called his hand on it, twice he done that. Isaac done the same thing with Rebekah. They were fearful. He was afraid. And so when the king called his hand and said, wait a minute, because God struck the king and everybody else sick. All the men of the kingdom got sick. And so when the king, and the Lord came to one of the kings in a dream and said, you took a man's wife. And the Lord let him know he was going to destroy him. And he said, I didn't know. He said, in the innocence of my hands, God, I did not know that was his wife. He told me it was his sister, and I did not know. I'm innocent in this. And so God had mercy on him. He said, well, I'll have mercy on you if you'll restore the man his wife. And they end up giving Abraham gifts of gold. He ended up making some money, some cash off of this. But he was afraid that they were going to kill him. And when they asked him, Abraham, why did you do this? You could have caused me to sin and caused the wrath of your God to come down on top of me. And he said, because I was afraid. That's what he said. I was afraid. I was afraid that you would kill me and take my wife after I was dead. And so Abraham lied, and he had fears just like we have fears. All right? So it's not like we're full of fear and we feel like we can't do anything. God came down and he fixed his flibs and he fixed his lies and he fixed all that for Abraham because Abraham doubted. You know something else he doubted? He doubted in God's perfect plan. Now, you're talking about a man that was so close to God that God come down and talked to him often. But he was doubting God's plan when he listened to Sarai, his wife. And he took Hagar as his concubine, as his wife, second wife, concubine, to fulfill the promise that God gave him when it wasn't his place or his business to do that. Why? Well, because he doubted. There was a seed of doubt. Her plan started sounding pretty good. Now, I don't know if she nagged him to death. She could have been a nagger. I don't know. She could have nagged him and nagged him and nagged him until he just gave in. But he had doubt. If he had looked at her and said, now listen, Sarah, God said that I was going to have a son. Me and you were going to have that son. And so me and Hagar are not going to have a son together because God said it and we're going to wait on him. Because back then, the man's word was it. You can't tell me. We can blame poor little Eve all we want to, but it was Adam that received the command. And it was Adam, the one that gave in. And we cannot, blame all the time Sarah because Abraham should have stood up and said, no, we're not going to do that. This is God's plan, and we're going to follow God's plan. But Teresa, I believe he had some doubt. It had been a while, and he started having some doubt. And so he gave in to that doubt, and he went along with Sarah's plan so that he would have a son. And it's caused this earth trouble ever since. This whole world has been troubled because of that one act, that one thing that Abraham did has caused us this trouble and this problem that we're with. And so, This man, you'd think, can God use this man? He was an idol worshiper. He was somebody that was afraid. He was lying. He lied several times. And he doubted and tried to fulfill God's plan on his own. How could he be a friend of God? How could he be somebody that God talked to all the time? But he did. Not only did he talk to God, but he got so close to God, Becky, that he was willing to offer up Isaac, his son, to God. Amy, he became willing. He became so close to God that he was willing to do that, to give up his son. Not only that, but he became so brave that he saved Lot and his daughters twice, his family twice. Once from captivity. One time, when they had separated, there was some raiders that came down, and they took Lot and his family and all the stuff that they owned, they took them in captivity. And Abraham took some men with him and went down and saved them. Not only that, but he saved them from Sodom. When God said he was going to go down, and I love what God said, should we keep this from Abraham? My friends, should we keep this that I'm getting ready to do from Abraham? To be so close, Amy, that God would look down and see something getting ready to happen to your life, or maybe one of your relatives' lives, and he'd go, I don't think I want to keep this from Amy. I'm going to let her know what's getting ready to go on. Come on in. And so God counted him worthy enough to warn him and to help him when he had to go get his family away from the raiders. Told him his plans. And this was a guy that was a liar and a doubter and that was fearful. Okay? I'm going to stop right there. I've got others, and I'm just, because it's a two-parter. Might be a three-parter. I don't know. But what I want us to realize tonight, what I feel like God was telling me at the beginning of this message was this. Don't be afraid to be a change maker. When I say move, move. When I say get up and do, get up and do. When I tell you to drive a bus, drive a bus. When I tell you to fix the food, fix the food. When I tell you to work in the altar, work in the altar. When I tell you to go pray for Sister Claudette, get up and pray for Sister Claudette. When I tell you to come up and sing a song, you might not want to, but get up and sing a song. I've got singers in here that can sing good that never sings a song unless everybody else is singing. God may be calling you to sing maybe one song, maybe one particular song. Maybe you'll say, like I've said 100 times, God, that's the only song I know. It's the only song I sing. I'm sure they're getting tired of it because I know I am. But Sister Claudette, we have got to be change makers. In order to be a change maker, we've got to be obedient. And if we can't be obedient, we're never going to change the world. We're never going to change our families, and we're never going to change us. That's what's important. When God tells us to do something, it's not just only to bless other people, but it's to bless us. Because we've become those people where we know that obedience is better than sacrifice. And God begins working in those small things. Sister Kim, his job. God spoke so good to you Sunday. Told you how he was going to move and the things he was going to do for you. And my Lord in heaven, it was just a few days and he done exactly what he said. God can do those things. I mean, Junebug, how many things in your life have you asked God to move in and he's moved? You look back and you see how he's moved. Some was hard. Sometimes took some time. And sometimes it was hard to do. But he done it. Amen? So for us to be change makers, we're going to have to learn to be obedient. And I'm going to talk some more on this the next probably couple of Sundays or the next times I preach.